You're listening to Chess, an AI Lesson, the podcast that uses artificial intelligence to help amateur players play better chess. Have you ever lost a chess game and had no idea why? You made reasonable moves, you avoided obvious blunders, and yet somehow your opponent just took over the board. If that sounds familiar, you're in the right place.
Welcome to Chess, an AI Lesson, the podcast dedicated to helping amateur players like you actually get better at chess, using the most powerful coaching tool ever created, artificial intelligence. I'm your host, and every episode, we're going to break down the game in a way that's practical, clear, and genuinely useful. Whether you're a complete beginner or a seasoned club player looking to sharpen your edge. Here's what makes this podcast different. We're not just talking theory. We're feeding real games played by players just like you, into cutting-edge AI engines, and then translating what the AI sees into advice you can actually apply over the board. No grandmaster jargon, no abstract principles that don't connect to your games, just honest, data-driven chess improvement. In today's episode, we're starting at the very foundation. We'll explore why most amateur players plateau, why they keep making the same types of mistakes no matter how much they play, and what the AI tells us about how to break through that ceiling. We'll look at the 3 most common thinking errors that hold players back, and I'll give you one concrete habit you can start building today that the AI consistently identifies as a game changer. Whether you're playing 5-minute blitz on your phone or preparing for your local club tournament, this episode is going to give you a new way to think about your chess. So settle in and let's get started. This is Chess, an AI Lesson. Part 2, blunder number 1. Hanging pieces. Let's start with the blunder that costs amateur players more points than anything else, the hanging piece. A hanging piece is simply a piece that can be captured for free. No recapture, no compensation, just a free piece for your opponent. And you'd think at a certain level this would stop happening, but the data tells a very different story. When AI engines analyze amateur games, we're talking players rated anywhere from complete beginners up to around 1,400 or 1,500 on platforms like chess.com or Lichess. Hanging pieces show up in nearly every single game. Not occasionally, every game. Sometimes multiple times per game. So why does this keep happening? If it's such an obvious mistake, why can't players stop making it? The answer comes down to how humans naturally think about chess versus how we need to think about chess. When most amateur players consider a move, they're focused on what they want to do. They see an opportunity. Maybe they can attack the opponent's king. Maybe they can grab a pawn. Maybe they spot what looks like a winning combination, and their mind locks onto that idea. The brain gets excited about the plan, and in that excitement, it stops asking a critical question. What does my opponent do next? This is what chess psychologists call tunnel vision. And AI analysis confirms it's the root cause of the vast majority of hanging piece blunders. Here's how it typically plays out. You move your bishop to an aggressive square, threatening something on the king side. It feels like a great move, but in doing so, you've just left your knight on the other side of the board completely undefended. Your opponent ignores your threat entirely, takes the knight, and suddenly you're a piece down with nothing to show for it. The AI saw it instantly, you didn't. Why? Because the AI doesn't have a plan it's emotionally attached to. It evaluates every position with fresh eyes, considering all captures, all threats, all responses simultaneously. Humans don't work that way. We get attached to our ideas. So what's the fix? The AI's recommendation is deceptively simple. Before you make any move, ask yourself one question. Can my opponent take anything for free after this move? Just that. One question. Every single move. Chess players sometimes call this the blunder check, and it sounds almost too basic to be worth mentioning. But study after study of amateur games, and AI analysis backs this up completely, shows that players who consistently apply this one habit reduce their hanging piece blunders by more than half almost immediately. Let's make it concrete. You've decided on your move. Before you play it, mentally lift your piece and place it on the target square. Now freeze. Look at the entire board. Is there anything your opponent can now capture that they couldn't before? Is there anything you've just stopped defending by moving that piece? If the answer is yes, find a different move. It takes maybe 5 extra seconds, but those 5 seconds are worth more to your chess improvement than hours of opening study. Now, there's a second layer to hanging pieces that the AI reveals, and this one surprises a lot of players. It's not just about the pieces you move, it's about the pieces you forget about. When you're calculating a sequence of moves, your attention naturally follows the pieces that are actively involved in that sequence. The rook you're maneuvering, the queen you're lining up. But while your attention is over there, pieces on the other side of the board can become quietly undefended as the position shifts around them. This is called a loose piece, and it's a ticking time bomb. The AI flags loose pieces constantly in amateur games because experienced players and computer engines know exactly how to exploit them. They'll build up pressure, force you to make more moves, and then suddenly your loose piece becomes a target at exactly the wrong moment. The habit here is to regularly scan your pieces, all of them, and ask, is this piece defended? If not, is it safe? Can my opponent attack it in the next few moves? This kind of whole board awareness is something that separates improving players from stagnating ones, and it's a habit you can start building right now. One more thing on hanging pieces before we move on. The AI data shows something interesting about when these blunders are most likely to happen. It's in the transition from the opening to the middle game, and again in time pressure. These are the moments when the position is changing rapidly, when pieces are being reorganized, and when the temptation to keep pushing your own agenda is strongest. So be especially vigilant at these moments. Slow down. Ask the question. Every time. Part 3, blunder number 2, ignoring opponent threats. If hanging pieces is the number one killer of amateur games, ignoring opponent threats is a very close second. And in some ways, it's even more instructive, because it reveals something fundamental about how chess improvement actually works. Here's the pattern the AI sees constantly. An amateur player has a plan. Maybe they're building up an attack on the king side. They're moving pieces into position, feeling good about the game, feeling in control, and then their opponent does something unexpected. A counterattack, a sudden threat, a piece that lands on an aggressive square, and the amateur player ignores it. They keep executing their plan, and 2 or 3 moves later, they're in serious trouble. Why does this happen? Again, it comes back to tunnel vision. But there's also something else at work here: optimism bias. Humans tend to underestimate threats to themselves and overestimate the strength of their own plans. It's a cognitive bias that affects all of us, and it shows up in chess in a very specific way. When you're the one attacking, everything looks promising. When your opponent makes a threat, your brain naturally looks for reasons why it's not that serious. Maybe you can just ignore it. Maybe your attack will land first. Maybe the threat isn't as dangerous as it looks. And sometimes that's true, but the AI tells us it's true far less often than amateur players think. The AI has no optimism bias. It doesn't have a plan it wants to execute. When it sees a threat, it evaluates it objectively, based purely on the position. And what the AI consistently shows is that when an opponent makes a real threat, the correct response is almost always to address that threat, not to ignore it in favor of your own agenda. There's a famous principle in chess. Every move your opponent makes changes the position. When the position changes, your plan may need to change too. This is what strong players mean when they talk about flexibility. The ability to update your plan based on what your opponent is actually doing, rather than what you wish they were doing. So how do you build this skill? The AI recommendation is to start every move with your opponent, not yourself. Before you think about what you want to do, ask, what is my opponent threatening? What did their last move do? Why did they play it? What are they trying to achieve? This single habit, making your opponent's threat the first thing you consider, not an afterthought, is one of the most high-leverage improvements you can make to your chess thinking process. Let me give you a framework that AI-assisted coaching often uses. It's called the STOP method. Before every move, stop, pause before you play. Threats, identify all opponent threats. Options, consider your responses. Pick, choose the best move. It sounds simple, but applying it consistently is genuinely transformative. The AI analysis shows that the majority of catastrophic blunders, the kind where you lose a queen or walk into a checkmate, happen when players skip the first two steps entirely. They go straight to options and pick, based on their pre-existing plan, without ever stopping to ask what their opponent just threatened. Now, there's an important nuance here. Not every opponent threat needs to be met directly. Sometimes the best response to a threat is a counter-threat that forces your opponent to deal with your problem first. Sometimes you can ignore a threat because your own attack is faster. But, and this is crucial, that decision needs to be made consciously, based on calculation, not unconsciously, based on wishful thinking. The AI can tell the difference between a player who ignores a threat because they've calculated they can get away with it, and a player who ignores a threat because they didn't notice it. The first is good chess. The second is a blunder waiting to happen. Practically speaking, here's what you can do right now. The next time you play a game, even a 5-minute blitz, make a commitment. After every single move your opponent makes, before you touch a piece, say to yourself, what is my opponent threatening? Just articulate it. Out loud if you're alone, mentally if you're in a game. Make it a ritual. Make it automatic. Because the moment it becomes automatic is the moment your chess starts to meaningfully improve. Here's something that might surprise you. When AI engines analyze amateur games, one of the most consistent findings is not about the opening, and it's not even about the middle game. It's about the end game. Specifically, it's about how many games amateur players should win, but don't, because their endgame technique falls apart at the critical moment. The endgame is the phase of the game most amateur players study the least. Opening theory is exciting, middle game tactics are fun to solve, but endgames feel dry, technical, slow, and so most players arrive at the endgame with a vague sense that they should be winning, but no clear plan for how to convert that advantage into a point. The AI has no such ambiguity. Given a winning endgame position, a strong engine will convert it with machine-like precision every time. And by studying how the AI plays endgames, we can extract some principles that will immediately help your results. Let's start with the most common endgame mistake the AI identifies in amateur games: passive king play. In the endgame, the king is not a liability, it's a weapon. This is one of the most important conceptual shifts in all of chess. In the middle game, you tuck your king away and keep it safe. In the endgame, you march your king toward the center and use it actively. Players who don't make this transition are throwing away winning positions constantly. The AI will always activate the king in the endgame. Always. It's not even a question. And yet amateur players, conditioned by middle game thinking, keep their kings passive on the back rank while their opponent's kings stride purposefully toward the action. The result is positions that should be winning turning into draws, and positions that should be drawn turning into losses. The second major endgame error the AI flags is pawn promotion blindness. In many endgames, the entire game comes down to a race. Can you promote a pawn before your opponent does? Or can you stop your opponent's pawn while queening your own? The AI calculates these races precisely, counting tempos, calculating opposition, knowing exactly which pawn endgames are won and which are drawn. Amateur players guess, and guessing in pawn endgames is extremely expensive. There are some fundamental pawn endgame principles that every improving player should know. The opposition, where two kings face each other with one square between them, and the player who does not have the move has the advantage. The key squares, specific squares that, if your king reaches, guarantee the pawn promotes regardless of what your opponent does. The square of the pawn, a simple geometric rule that tells you instantly whether a king can catch a passed pawn. These aren't advanced concepts. They're foundational. And the AI analysis shows that players who understand them win significantly more endgames than players who don't, even if their middle game play is identical. The third endgame error is trading into bad endgames. This one happens earlier than the endgame itself. It happens in the middle game, when players make piece exchanges without considering what endgame they're heading toward. The AI is ruthless about this. It knows which endgames favor which side. It knows that a bishop can be better or worse than a knight, depending on the pawn structure. It knows that rook endgames are notoriously drawish, and that queen endgames are complex and dangerous. Amateur players often trade pieces simply to simplify the position, to reduce the complexity, to feel more comfortable. But simplification only helps you if the resulting endgame is actually better for you. Sometimes the best way to maintain a winning advantage is to keep pieces on the board, to keep the position complex, to avoid giving your opponent a chance to defend a theoretically drawn endgame. So what's the practical takeaway here? 3 things. 1. Activate your king the moment the endgame begins. Don't wait. March it toward the center immediately. 2. Study basic pawn endgames. Spend 30 minutes learning the opposition and the concept of key squares. This is the highest return on investment in all of chess study. 3. Before you make a trade in the middle game, ask yourself, what endgame am I heading toward, and is it good for me? If you can't answer that question, think twice before making the trade. Part 5, putting it all together, the AI review process. So we've covered the 3 big blunders: hanging pieces, ignoring opponent threats, and poor endgame technique. But knowing about these mistakes and actually fixing them in your games are 2 very different things. And this is where the AI review process becomes genuinely transformative. The single most powerful thing you can do to improve your chess, and the AI data is unambiguous about this, is to review your own games with an engine after you play them. Not someone else's games, not famous grandmaster games. Your games. The mistakes you made, the moments where the position slipped away, the moves that looked good but weren't. Here's why this works so well. When you review your own game with an AI, you're not learning abstract principles. You're learning about your specific patterns, your specific blind spots, your specific tendencies. And that personalized feedback is orders of magnitude more effective than generic chess advice. Let me walk you through exactly how to do this, using tools that are completely free. The first tool is Lichess. If you don't already have a Lichess account, go create one right now. It's free, it has no ads, and it has one of the best game analysis tools available anywhere. After you play a game on Lichess, you can click the Analysis Board button and it will run your game through Stockfish, one of the strongest chess engines in the world, and show you every mistake, every blunder, every missed opportunity, ranked by severity. The second tool is Chess.com's Game Review feature. If you play on Chess.com, the free tier gives you a limited number of game reviews per day, and the paid tier gives you unlimited access. The Chess.com review is particularly good because it classifies moves as brilliant, great, best, inaccuracy, mistake, or blunder, giving you an intuitive sense of where the game went wrong. Now, here's the critical thing about how to use these tools. Most players open the analysis, scroll to the red moves, the blunders, and just look at what the engine says they should have played instead. That's better than nothing, but it's not the most effective approach. The AI-informed method is this: when you reach a blunder or mistake in your game, before you look at what the engine recommends, try to figure out what you missed yourself. Ask, why was my move bad? What did I not see? Was it a hanging piece I created? A threat I ignored? A bad endgame trade? Actively diagnose the type of mistake before you look at the solution. This process of self-diagnosis is enormously powerful. It trains your pattern recognition in a way that simply being told the right answer doesn't. It forces your brain to engage with the problem, to think about categories of mistakes, and to build the mental habits that will catch these errors in future games. After you've made your diagnosis, then look at the engine line. Ask, does the engine's recommendation match my diagnosis? If the engine says you should have defended against a threat you didn't notice, your diagnosis is confirmed. You have a threat detection problem. If the engine shows you a better piece placement you didn't consider, that might point to a positional understanding gap. The engine is giving you a map of your weaknesses, but you have to read the map. Over time, and we're talking weeks, not months, patterns will emerge. You'll start to notice that you consistently miss knight forks, or that you always underestimate passed pawns, or that your rook endgame technique is consistently the point where your winning positions fall apart. These patterns are gold. They tell you exactly what to study, exactly where your effort will have the most impact. One practical recommendation: keep a simple mistake log. After each game review, write down one sentence describing the most important mistake you made. Just one sentence. After 10 games, read back through your log. The pattern will almost certainly be obvious, and once you can see the pattern, you can target it directly. The players who improve fastest at chess are not the ones who study the most. They're the ones who study the right things, the things that address their specific weaknesses. The AI review process is how you figure out what those things are. Part 6, recap and what comes next. We've covered a lot of ground today, so let's bring it all together. Episode 1 of Chess, an AI lesson, has been about the 3 blunders that cost amateur players the most points, and what the AI tells us about how to fix them. Blunder number 1, hanging pieces. The fix is simple, but requires discipline. Before every move, ask yourself one question. Can my opponent take anything for free after this? 5 seconds. Every move. Build it into your routine until it's automatic. And remember to scan for loose pieces, pieces that aren't currently under attack but that have drifted away from their defenders as the position evolved. Blunder number 2, ignoring opponent threats. The fix is to change the order of your thinking. Start with your opponent, not yourself. Before you consider what you want to do, ask, what did my opponent just threaten? What are they trying to achieve? The STOP method, stop, threats, options, pick, is a practical framework you can start applying in your very next game. Blunder number 3, poor endgame technique. The fixes are: activate your king the moment the endgame begins, study basic pawn endgame theory because it has the highest return on investment of any chess study you can do, and think about the endgame implications of your middle game piece trades before you make them. And underpinning all of this is the AI review process. Reviewing your own games with a free engine like Stockfish on Lichess or Chess.com, self-diagnosing your mistakes before looking at the engine's suggestions, and keeping a mistake log to identify your personal patterns. These are not complicated ideas, but simple is not the same as easy. Applying these habits consistently, game after game, requires intention and discipline. The good news is that at the amateur level, consistency matters far more than complexity. You don't need to study grandmaster novelties. You don't need to memorize 15 moves of opening theory. You need to stop hanging pieces, start seeing threats, and learn to convert your winning endgames. Do those 3 things, and your rating will go up. The AI is very clear on that. Now, a quick look ahead. In Episode 2, we're going to go deeper on the opening phase of the game. Specifically, we're going to look at what AI analysis tells us about the most common opening mistakes at the amateur level. Not the specific moves, but the principles behind them. Why do certain openings keep getting amateur players into trouble? What does the AI see in those opening positions that most players miss? And how do you build an opening repertoire that's actually sustainable for someone who doesn't want to memorize hundreds of lines? If today's episode was about surviving the game, Episode 2 is about starting it well. I think you're going to find it really useful. Thank you so much for listening to Chess, an AI lesson. If this episode gave you something to think about, if you're going to try the blunder, check in your next game, or you're going to pull up Lichess and review a game for the first time, then this podcast is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and consider sharing it with a chess friend who's also trying to improve. The more people we have in this community, the richer the conversation gets. Until next time, keep playing, keep reviewing, and keep improving. This has been Chess, an AI lesson. I'll see you in Episode 2.